Should unmute myself. Hello, good evening. We are live. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this evening's very important webinar that we are calling WTF Do I Say? How do we talk about this moment? And so we're so grateful for all of y'all who are joining us today. We're also so grateful for those who joined us on Tuesday. If you are joining us again, if you joined for Tuesday as well, welcome back. I am so grateful. I'm looking at all the folks in the chat from all over the country. We're so excited that y'all are here. My name is Tamika Middleton. I use she, her pronouns. I am the managing director here at Women's March. And we are grateful for all of you. I'm joining y'all from Georgia. I see everybody telling us where they are. I am in Georgia. I saw some Georgia folks in the chat. And this moment is so it's so unprecedented. It's such a an invigorating time because there's so much happening, there's so much possibility, but then also at the same time there is a modicum of fear of coming in the aftermath of some political violence, and with the potential for more political violence, there's also the fear around a potential in this rise of fascism. And so we want to make sure that we are coming together consistently, that we are staying in community with each other, that we are continuing to not just talk to each other, but also build with each other and build our skills, and be about the work of organizing and really about building this feminist movement. And so we're grateful for everyone who always joins us on these calls. Thank you wherever you are viewing from. If you're viewing us on Facebook, if you're viewing us on YouTube, if you're watching the recording, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. We have a really amazing little lineup for you all today. We're going to have me here with our opening, our agenda overview. Then we're going to go into some conversation with one of our guests around top line messaging guidance, our guest Rinku Sen. And then our very own Amanda Chavez Barnes will join to talk about tips for combating disinfo and using message tested talking points and resources. And then we'll have the team from FEMINIST coming to give us some insights on how to do digital communications and giving us some practical application of these tools and these skills. So continue to drop in the chat where you're joining us from. Feel free to drop questions in the chat. We'll try to track them. We're going to, as usual, try to be as efficient as possible and respect everybody's time. And so I will thank y'all again, and I am going to pass it to our first guest, Rinku Sen, who is our former board chair at Women's March and is also just a really phenomenal, long-time digital movement communicator and feminist organizer. So Rinku, we're going to bring Rinku up to the stage.
Thank you so much, Tamika. As always, it is beautiful to join the Women's March community at any time. I'm going to do some broad principles for my guidance. And over time, over the next few months, you're going to see a lot of advice about what to say. You're going to have scripts for door knocking. You're going to have, there are going to be messaging memos floating around, and we might end up talking about a few of those. But when you're seeing them, I would like you to assess those pieces of advice against the guidance I'm going to give you, and then make your choices. So the very first piece of guidance when you're trying to recruit folks to anything, including to vote for your candidate, is to listen and find something that is coming from the other person that you can connect with. It doesn't have to be a huge something. It doesn't have to be like our entire world views. It just needs to be something. You have kids, I have kids. You live in this neighborhood, I live in this neighborhood. So the first piece of guidance is to listen and connect. My second piece of guidance is that you want to lead with shared values and shared interests, rather than with sacrifice. So there are definitely going to be messages floating around that say, for example, that white women need to make sacrifices now so that we can have a healthy country. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on the white women who voted for Trump in the last two elections. Those are all true, and we have feelings about them. But when people vote, generally, they're not thinking, what can I sacrifice with my vote? They're thinking, how can my life, my family's life, my community's life improve with my vote? So you want to lead with how much we value taking good care of everybody around us and of our democracy, and shared values and interests rather than sacrifice at this stage. My third piece of advice is that you want to lead with optimism. That doesn't mean overconfidence. Overconfidence isn't great because it leads people to stay home and not do the hard work that it takes to actually win an election. But you want to express your optimism, and you want your pitches to be a lot more optimism than they are fear. Start with the optimism. You can eventually talk about things that are scaring you or things that should scare the person that you're trying to recruit, but you don't want to start with fear. In cognitive psychology, we know there's lots and lots and lots of data from all sorts of issues that shows us that fear depresses action. So if I am afraid of, for example, it's very important not to talk about Trump as an already dictator. He's not in office, so he cannot dictate. He's an aspiring dictator. He would like to move us all in authoritarian directions. But that if we call him a dictator now, we're actually kind of conceding the election and behaving and sending a message that, another Trump election is inevitable. We obviously don't want to do that because we want people to do something different. So those are my first three pieces of advice for most people that you're going to be working with or trying to recruit. Listen and connect. Emphasize shared values and shared interests rather than talk people into making a sacrifice, and lead with optimism rather than fear. I want to just take another minute to talk about some of the messages that are coming from the progressive left. So one common message every one of these presidential elections is that we wind up voting for the lesser of two evils, and that's gross. We wish we had better choices. My thinking about that is, why would you vote for the greater of two evils? It just doesn't make any rational sense. If you have two options in front of you and they're both bad in significant ways, you choose the one that's less bad and that's going to cause the least harm. Preventing people from suffering is a perfectly valid reason to vote a particular way. So if you're confronted with a lot of, I'm not voting for the lesser of two evils, I want a perfect candidate, I am going to express my values by refusing to vote for the lesser of two evils, this is your opening for what the greater of two evils would mean. And this is where you want to prepare 2 or 3 examples of what a Trump administration would mean. What would it mean for Palestine? It would mean that he intends to deport protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters. What does it mean for climate? He has said, drill, baby, drill. So that's his plan on climate. Fossil fuels all the way. What has he said about immigrants? We don't like them. They're all bad. So, and obviously, just recently we got a a ruling from a Trump-built Supreme Court that criminalizes poverty and homelessness. So you can use those examples, or you can use other examples, but when you're debating the lesser of two evils discourse, when you're caught in that discourse, you, I think, want to make clear what the greater of two evils would actually produce in our country. So that is my essential advice. Listen and find something to connect with. It can be a small thing, it can be a big thing, but you have to ask some questions and listen to the person you're trying to recruit in order to connect with them. Shared values and interests more than shared sacrifice, and optimism more than fear. Those are your proactive leading things. If you have to go on the defensive in your recruitment or in talking about this election and this moment, then from the left, you may get different versions of I'm unsatisfied with the lesser of two evils, and uh, the points you want to make there are about what really what the greater evil would actually mean for our lives. Yeah, I think maybe the last thing I would say is that when you're talking shared values and interests, and when you're um, leading with optimism, those are the places where you're going to talk about your candidate's record, all of the good things that they have done over time, all of the ways in which they listen to the American people and to all of the people who live in this country, their voting record, their legislative record, their uh, talking record, the things they have said and committed to. So that's my rundown. Listen, shared values, optimism, and always pick the lesser of two evils if that's what you've got in front of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rinku, for your wisdom. We really appreciate you sharing your insight and experience with us. My name is Amanda Chavez Barnes. I'm Senior Director of Programs at Women's March. I lead the work at our sister organization, Women's March Network, with Digital Defenders. And I wanted to share with you all today some insights around what we have learned, in doing that work that is actually most effective with our folks. And so, first, I want to ground us in what we're here and what we're fighting for. Feminists are fighting for a future for all. And that's what we're here to do, really, is we are here to um, cut through the noise, right? We've seen what the internet has to offer. We've seen, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the blatant, virulent misogyny, anti-Black racism that's reared its ugly head. We've seen people sowing misinformation unintentionally and disinformation intentionally and trying to bait us. And we've seen well-meaning but ineffective advocates who are unfortunately taking the bait and trying to contest some of these things that our opposition is saying, and unfortunately amplifying those things that they're saying in the process. And so, what we want to do, we believe actually that feminist organizing is the antidote to what ails us overall in the online spaces. We know that feminists organize with stamina, compassion, joy, care, and endurance. So, I also wanted to remind us to ground ourselves. We know that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And for those of us who really want to see liberation for our communities and our lifetimes, we have to be lifelong long distance runners or swimmers or cyclists. We all have our different lanes, our different tools in our areas, but the point is we want to pace ourselves. We also know that there are basically in this election cycle, there's going to be 3 phases. Right now, we're at the very early stage where we're just hearing about, the likelihood that Kamala Harris will be the presidential nominee, and lots of folks are not familiar with her. So right now, it's an early stage of awareness and really getting people to know this candidate and what does she stand for, and most importantly, what is the future that 4 years, the next 4 years with this candidate would represent, and contrasting that against the future that would likely happen with our opposition. Then there will be fairly quickly we'll lean into really a persuasion phase. And we know that in order for a message to sink in, it takes a lot of repetition. About approximately 7 times is a statistic that's often quoted. People need to see or hear something before it really sinks in. And so persuasion is also a really, really important phase. And then right before, it's the final day to vote, we want to lean in very heavily to turnout messaging, which is different from persuasion. It's really activating people, making sure that they do get out to vote. And so we're talking to people who are most likely on our side, right? But may, not have a plan to vote, may have barriers to vote, or just maybe not feel super enthusiastic or prioritize it for whatever reason. So right now, again, we're in the early stage, and this is the awareness stage. We want to be effective messengers for our cause. And so we're here to promote an effective values-based public narrative. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this recipe for effective messaging later, but this is what we have found that is a good combination of things to keep in mind whenever you're coming up with a message, regardless of what that message is. And really, we're doing this because we want to win better conditions now and build the foundation for a feminist future, right? So I want to talk about becoming a strategic social media user for a little bit. And one of those things that's really important to do online in particular is to know your audience. So I'm not talking about people who are in your network, like close friends, loved ones, and acquaintances. And I know that our partners at Feminist are going to go into this a little bit more with some additional insights later. But you can sort of, if you're seeing conversation online with people who are not in your close circle, you can sort of categorize into 3 buckets and make your decisions about how to engage from there. If someone is a troll or a potential bot or an anti, like a forced birther type of person, who stands against our values, or just completely opposition, and you see really nasty stuff, do not take the bait, do not engage. This is what the right wants us to do. When they say these things about DEI hire, they want us to spend our time trying to refute that. When they're saying all these racist and misogynist and blatant attacks, they want us to be on the defense so that they can be on the offense and control the message. And I am here to tell you that we cannot play that game. We cannot spend our time refuting what they say and be like the nah, because all that does is give more power to their narrative. Just delete. If you have the power, if you control the page, that these comments are posted on, or the community, delete the comment, mute them, restrict them, block them, whatever the options on the platform are. But do not engage and do not amplify, and don't let them get in your head. We control the narrative. We have to stay on the offense. If there's people who look like they might possibly be persuadable, they seem like they're asking a question genuinely, engage strategically. Ground yourself before you engage. Remind yourself, okay, here's my talking points. Here's my recipe for effective messaging. I'm going to go in with, in good faith, believing that this person is asking, that they're also in good faith. Sometimes we might find out that they weren't asking in good faith and they were just trying to bait us into a back and forth. As soon as that becomes clear, that person is no longer a possibly persuadable. They're now in the troll, bot, anti-op category, and the same message applies. Don't engage, don't take the bait, block them, completely just cut them out, and don't spend any more energy on that. When there's comments from like-minded folks, sometimes other folks have really effective messaging that are in line with all this, message testing, tested effective things that we're going to share with you. And in that case, we want to boost that. A lot of times we only comment on the things that we disagree with, and that's only helping the opposition. We want to boost effective content. So comment on it, say, yes, I completely agree. Here's a link to learn more about that. Yes, anding both really good content and well-meaning but possibly ineffective content, and lifting each other up is the best thing that we can do. Think about what are other folks thinking whenever they are watching interactions between those of us who are on the same side. If we attack people, if we sound condescending because they didn't use precisely the right language, or they maybe got something wrong, they're not going to want to be a part of a community that talks to each other that way. So when people see how we interact with each other, do they get FOMO and be like, oh, it looks like that would be a fun team to be on? Or do they get the ick? Like, oh man, they talk to each other so bad. Like, why would anybody ever want to join them? So just being mindful of that, coming from a place of kindness and compassion and assuming the best. We're all learning. Many of us are learning how to use these platforms for the first time. There's a lot of older folks who are learning new terms for the first time. Try to treat people with gentleness and assume the best until people show you that they're actually in the troll bot anti-op category, in which case don't spend any more energy on them. The next thing I wanted to share is about misinformation. A lot of us unintentionally spread misinformation just because we react emotionally and we are too quick to want to share something. So here's some guidelines to check before you share. What's the source of the information? Can you find that same information posted elsewhere? And then, does anyone stand to gain something from putting this out there? What would the possible motive be? Is it too good to be true? And then what are your own motivations for sharing? Sometimes we want to, share something in a performative way rather than it being something that's, we know is accurate, compelling, accessible, and inclusive. And we have to check ourselves sometimes before we just impulsively, go ahead and share because we want to be in the in group or we want to signal, something about ourselves. And if you spot bad comments, again, don't react, don't engage negatively. If you see things that are misinformation that could actually possibly cause real confusion, what I want you to do is actually screenshot it, put an X through that content if you can, draw an X using your phone or something like that, and then repost that and do a truth sandwich. First, state the truth, like actually this polling location is open. These are the hours that it's going to be open. You may have seen something circulating that says that it's been closed, but that's not true. It is still open and it will be open until 8 p.m. Something like that. So a truth sandwich, you start with the truth, you include the yucky filling of the misinformation in the middle, and then you reiterate the truth again. That's a way that you can counteract misinformation that's potentially really harmful, that needs to be combated and rather than just ignored, but without unintentionally amplifying it. Hold on one second. I am a single mom of twins, and my son's being really loud, so I'm going to close. Okay, resuming. So lastly, I'm going to go back into the getting the message right: accurate, compelling, accessible, and inclusive. Sometimes the compelling is the most difficult because we don't always know what's going to be compelling to all people. However, I would say to substitute another C word sometimes for compelling is compassion. And so just like Rinku was saying, finding common ground and being compassionate with our message is usually going to go a long way whenever we are trying to persuade someone. So whatever you can, avoid any tone that's like condescension or sounding dismissive or anything like that, but actually being compelling in a way that is going to reach people's hearts as well as their minds. Being inclusive also is something that sometimes people are confused about. What does it mean to be inclusive? It just means that instead of saying, well, for me specifically, personally, my own situation and me and only me, but being able to expand whatever you're sharing so that other people can also see themselves in it. So like, no matter where we come from, we all really want the same things. We want to be able to, live in a safe community. We want the freedom to decide, when and if and how we start a family. We want our kids to be free to learn in schools without having to fear for their safety. And making those messages broad and inclusive so other people can connect and see themselves in it is really important. And then, of course, accessible, using plain conversational language, avoiding jargon or acronyms whenever you can. And of course, the accuracy, true and grounded in reality. So again, not unintentionally spreading misinformation. And if we're trying to use statistics or like hard facts about things, making sure that we have a reliable source to back it up if we're asked for one, or if people ask, where can I find more information about that? And so I have a few toolkits. We're going to email these out to you. I'm going to share my screen to just kind of go through and show you the toolkits that we're going to email out. But pulling from them, some of the most important things is just contrasting the future that we're working towards versus the future that they want for us, right? And it's really a future of freedom versus fascism. Now, I don't recommend throwing around fascism when you're trying to persuade people, because it's not the most accessible term. A lot of people have no idea what it means. But just between us, we know that's what it is, right? That there is fascist tendencies that are arising in this country, and that's our job, is to beat them back. So a powerful example would be, this election is a choice between two different visions of the future, between Trump's Project 2025 MAGA dictatorship that will take away our freedoms versus a future with Vice President Kamala Harris, in which we have a say over the personal decisions that impact our lives. And a quick note about that too, I will say there's research that has come out that personal freedoms is much stronger than framing issues such as abortion, reproductive freedom as a women's rights issue. We have work to do for the long term, but in the in the medium and short term, ahead of this election, we know that male voters actually recoil when we walk into this trap that promotes, even lightly, men versus women as a frame. That frame is a Trump frame, and it also makes Kamala Harris smaller. She's running to be president for all Americans. She's fighting to protect freedoms for all Americans. MAGA is actually a really small but very loud and very dangerous faction. But Kamala Harris, by contrast, is fighting for a future that Americans broadly benefit from in every state, and not for any single segment, not for any single race or gender, right? And so we know that it may be true that it is a women's rights issue. I mean, it is true. It's not maybe true. It's a women's rights issue. It's an issue of gender oppressed people. However, that's not an effective message when we're trying to get the word out and we're trying to get people to vote against Trump, right? The other thing that we know is that referring to Kamala Harris as like making history or a groundbreaking candidate is actually the least persuasive of any message that we have. Not saying that we should stop saying that or stop celebrating. Women's March actually moderates a really large, like the largest group chat, probably, type of vibe in the Facebook group Pantsuit Nation. So if some of you are all from Pantsuit Nation, hey y'all. And in there, when we know that we're with like-minded people and we want to, celebrate and be joyous and have fun, we can definitely talk about, groundbreaking candidate and making history and things like that, because we also need to have fun too. And we also need to remain energized too, right? But that's sort of an in-group message. And it's not a message that performs outside of our in-group. It actually performs really badly compared to pretty much every other message. So just something to keep in mind. Another example, just contrasting, our future versus their future is, another issue. Our kids deserve the freedom to learn and to walk through their schools safe from the fear of gun violence. Instead of focusing on keeping our kids safe, MAGA Republicans want to ban books and control what our kids can learn, right? So these contrasts are really powerful. It's like Rinku said, we want to talk about the future that we want. We want to lead from a place of optimism. The toolkits that we're going to share have a bunch of examples of powerful phrases like this, but I pulled some here so you can get the idea. So yeah, we want to talk about the world that we want to create, the future that we're trying to build. And we want to make sure that we are actually, contrasting that with the future that the MAGA Republicans want to build. And so I'm going to share, let me drag this over here, a really great resource. And let me go ahead and put this up on a banner so you guys can find this. Our partners at Into Action Labs have created amazing visuals. So if you're ever looking for a visual to go along with your effective captions or messaging, go to library.intoaction.us and you'll see there's lots of different topics, right? that you can use. But the very top one is about Kamala Harris. And like we said, it is an awareness time. So if you're posting messages, trying to educate people and help people get familiar with where Vice President Harris stands on the issues, this collection is great to go along with that. We also have a collection here from Into Action Lab around Project 2025. And there's lots of great content here. So, no need to recreate the wheel. If there's something that's already here, then make sure that you go ahead and check this out so that you can get a nice visual to accompany your message. I also am just going to kind of preview some of the toolkits that we'll be pulling from to share these resources with you. So, Framing the Left is an amazing resource compiled by a lot of different organizations to give you sort of a really broad understanding of what are the different narrative tactics that are effective and issues that are important to highlight on each of these. So I saw some people talking about criminalizing homelessness, people talking about what do we say about the economy. This is a great resource for looking at how do we contrast the future that the MAGA Republicans want for us versus the future that we are actually fighting for and that we're going to vote for in November. So that's one of the toolkits there. And then we also have a great resource from Grow Progress that has text plus plus an image to go along with it. All of these are actually have been tested with audiences and are statistically significant in terms of moving people from voting Trump to voting Harris. One thing I do want to flag is there's a couple of hotspots that I want to mention really quickly. This may be an effective message, the prosecutor versus the felon, but I do want to offer a word of caution that, this may be sacrificing our long-term movement goals if we're going to go ahead and use felon as a blanket insult for everyone. Because I think many of us have good people in our lives, who may have made a mistake or may have not had good representation in the criminal justice system. As we know, many folks of color are unfortunately railroaded and not offered options. And so there are a lot of people with felony convictions who are amazing people and deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. So me personally, I would caution folks to maybe say something like a prosecutor versus perpetrator if you really want to use this frame. But there are also other effective messages that we can use if you, like me, are concerned about demonizing a whole class of people who overwhelmingly are people of color disproportionately because of the injustice in our criminal system. So that's just one flag and a hotspot that I did wanted to call out. But these are all great messages that, again, they have been tested and they're effective on moving people from the right to the left. And then one last thing I will say, I know a lot of people have been doing cute things with like the DEI thing, like, oh, DEI means determined, experienced, and inspirational. And it's a well-meaning, but again, by doing that, we are playing defense and we're actually giving more air and giving more life to something that's actually a really harmful and kind of hateful, well, not kind of, like, it feels very hateful to me. Some people have said it's a new N-word, in terms of, like, actually, if you really look at what's behind DEI hire, the way that it's weaponized against mostly Black folks, but also, women as well. And it's actually very ugly. And I think we will do well to let that stand and let those folks on the right be the people who are saying that, and not us kind of lightening that ugliness by trying to spin it into something positive, and also not amplifying it by, again, sort of repeating it, even if we are doing it for the right reasons. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end my presentation, but I'm really, really excited and grateful to intro our partners from Feminist who are joining us this evening. Feminist, if you did not know, is the largest social-first nonprofit media company serving the multifaceted lives of women, girls, and gender-expansive people, known as @FEMINIST. If you're not already following them on Instagram, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but go ahead and give them a follow, because they're actually reaching over 25 million global feminists each month through Instagram, TikTok, their newsletter, and their website. So I'm very excited to hear the insights that they have for us. And I'm going to go ahead and welcome them to share some more about messaging in this moment.
Hey, I'm super excited to be here.
Hi. Thank you, Amanda, and everyone else that has spoken. I'm super excited to take a little bit of time to share a little bit more of the insights that we found based on all of the digital organizing, advocacy, content, all of that we create and do to really mobilize people around feminist issues. So first, I just wanted to start by really just reiterating that Americans' trust in the political system is at historic lows, right? We know this. This has been proven and tested, and in some ways for very good reason. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but in just a matter of weeks, we've seen an assassination attempt, then a number of wild headlines from the RNC, trying to understand who the hell JD Vance is, then Biden dropping out of the race and now endorsing Kamala Harris. And that's all within a week, a week's time. And so I, for one, am tired, so very tired. And I know that I'm not alone in that, right? And I think as digital communicators, we really have to acknowledge and address really the pervasive fatigue and also the distrust that we're seeing. And I think setting the stage even a bit further, really with an account like Feminist and a presidential nominee that is both Black, South Asian, and woman, we are going to see so much gendered violence and disinformation, probably the most rampant online. Even more so, a 2020 study, for example, found that 336,000 pieces of abuse and disinformation were targeting 13 women candidates, and 78% targeted Kamala Harris. And so post Biden's endorsement, we are seeing these attacks on Harris sort of intensified, misogynoir in particular, and all the way that it really shows up online will continue to be really insidious. And so, yeah, I think that it's important to mention, and also really important to really equip ourselves and our community with like one, rest, which is like my ministry, but also just the tactics to really address and discuss these issues, as well as the many issues that everyone else has brought up on the call. So we mapped out a list of some do's and don'ts. This is really kind of speaking to the current digital landscape that I was mentioning and sort of preparing everyone for the misogynoir that we are bound to see. I think, again, for those that aren't familiar with that term, misogynoir is really this intersection between racism and sexism faced by women of color and Black women in particular. So again, it's really important that we equip ourselves and be prepared for all of this fight ahead.
Yes, and I feel free to screenshot this slide because on the bottom right, there's some nice little talking points. And I also want to mention, yes, Feminist is co-led. We're both co-founder and co-executive directors at Feminist, and together we believe that community is what's going to build the future of how we build the world that we all deserve. Okay, hope everybody got a little chance to screenshot. Moving on to the do's and don'ts. First of all, Kamala is brat. I love to see all of your interpretations in the chat. Those were all very correct. Thank you. So I think that's something that's been kind of echoed around here is educate yourself. Feel empowered to be the friend in the room who has the answers. If somebody's like, hey, when's the last day to vote? The last day to vote is November 5th, but you could vote early at XYZ date. when is the last day to register to vote? Like, all these are common questions that, yes, people can Google, but sometimes it doesn't hurt to be that friend that has that information. So definitely educate yourself and feel free to share that with your community, and no need to gatekeep when it comes to elections.
Yeah, and I think just to add it, like, share trusted resources, voices, perspectives, share feminist, and really share the voices of people that are really kind of on the ground doing the work too. Which leads me to the second do, which is mobilize, right? I think using digital tools to mobilize people offline is key, right? So including super clear calls to action. As Kyla pointed out, here's a resource to share, people to follow, reshare articles, validated ones. I know we had our previous presenter talked about disinformation, so really important not to share inaccurate information.
Absolutely. And then I think while we're like kind of on the subject, focus on the facts. We like to also say, like, policies over parties, because politicians really shouldn't be these like godlike figures or like that we're looking up to. Politicians work for us. So what we should be talking more about is, what are the policies that matter to us? Some of the big ones that we're focusing on right now is obviously reproductive justice. And you could do that by, one, sharing personal stories that you've maybe had where a policy has affected you or your family or the people around you. I think if you're someone who's living in a state like Texas right now, you're deeply impacted by the policies, and you have a lot to talk about when it comes to that repro justice. Next, I would say like democracy versus like MAGA extremism. Like, that's ultimately what's at stake at this election. I think that was also discussed earlier, that like this is a matter of freedom versus like fascism. So when we're looking at what could a future look like with where fascism is in play, that's looking at Project 2025. And as we're like thinking about Project 2025, I think that it's a very overwhelming document that most people will probably not read. And when you're sharing information about it, it can almost be too much. But since there's so many key points that are involved in this very large document, I think it's okay to focus on like one at a time. So I just found out yesterday that Project 2025 stops people from earning overtime pay. And this reverses the policy that the Biden administration issued this year that gave overtime pay to 4 million workers. So you can find this on page 492. You also can just find this information on when you see it on like different social media accounts, like for example, like ours at Feminist, we're sharing this information all the time. At Reproductive Freedom for All is sharing this information. There's, I don't know if I can share this link or not, but I'm pretty sure, like get to know project25.com or something like that. And it breaks all these things down. But ultimately what I'm pointing at is like focus on these like specific issues within the document that will directly impact your life. And those will really move the needle, focusing on policy. Next is the Supreme Court appointments. Whenever somebody, likes to say like, well, misinformation might be that, well, the truth is that a Trump-appointed court was the reason why Roe was reversed. And the fact is that in this next election, more court positions will be up for appointee. And that's why we really need to make sure that we're ensuring that we have a democratic state where our voices can be heard for who should be representing us. So I think that like when you're talking about how these decisions were made in the last like cycle for the Supreme Court rulings, these were Trump appointed justices, and they have absolutely nothing really to do with Biden or the Biden-Harris administration. And you can continue to promote policies and factual information by engaging.
Yeah. So as Kai mentioned, also just there's a ton of resources that are available. And also there's a lot of people working really hard to ensure that there's these messages, these toolkits, these resources that, creators, influencers, activists, organizers, media companies, they're all really working to provide and share a lot of information. And so the other do is to like engage, share, and support folks like us and other critical organizations doing this work. Also, there's not always a need to recreate the wheel. And so if you aren't someone that has time to read through a 1,000-page Heritage Foundation document and just have time to read through the top level from another media company that has like already done the work to share that with you, then yeah, engage with it, share, and support.
Absolutely. And I think that the way we don't really realize the way this algorithm works, there's multiple different algorithms happening at the same time, and comment sections are actually really important for disseminating information. So let's say in a comment section, there's a lot of like support and people being like, yes, this is great, or showing that this is like something that really matters to them. It's more likely that that piece of content will get seen. So yeah, reiterating that. We can defeat these patriarchal algorithms ourselves by the way we engage with our content. And hope. Okay, so hope is a funny word because sometimes it feels at this state of the world, it's really hard to be hopeful. But I do think that it takes people like us, everyone who's at this discussion right now, to imagine the world that we want and deserve. And so we can actually tell those stories. Like, I hope one day that I will have full bodily autonomy. And saying that into the world is inspiring to other people who maybe don't necessarily feel like they can achieve that yet, but hearing that from their community can make a difference. So I think there is such thing, and is also very important to show that sort of hopeful content, because it makes it feel like the power is back in our hands.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of woven through the previous panelists as well. Like this sort of civic optimism is really important and is also like more successful than fear-based, kind of like fear-mongering. While that there's plenty to do there as well, but relying on kind of hope and optimism is critically important, and also been touched on a lot. So I'll just kind of pass through it, or kind of speak to it quickly. But essentially, calling out misinformation when you see it, right? Through commenting, through calling people in if it's someone you know in your life, not calling someone out necessarily, depending on your strategies. But that can be really important to sort of stopping the spread of misinformation and disinformation, is to call it out.
I think respect is also really important here. You're going to see a lot of information online where, for people's various beliefs, when it relates to the Middle East and what's happening, that they don't feel comfortable like talking about voting, or they don't feel they need to vote. And granted, I think that everybody has their own individual unique story and what's important to them. And I think that we need to also ultimately respect each other's decisions. I think an area in which like it's okay to press, and somebody's like, hey, I really care about abortion rights because I don't think the government should be in my body, but my family typically votes Republican, so I'm kind of confused. That's an open door for you to hear this person out and maybe explain to them why voting against fascism and for freedom and democracy would maybe be better off decision. So I think it's like, yes, respecting people's stories, hearing them out, and being the helpful, listening, educated friend in the room to arrive to the point that maybe you want them to make, but also don't push someone who has their own reasons that are core to their beliefs, because ultimately, if you respect them, they will respect you. And that's what we need right now.
Yeah. And I think kind of rooted in this space of respect and empathy, and sort of like civic optimism, I think one tool that we all really have within our wheelhouse is sharing compelling personal stories on how these policies will impact our lives, or have impacted our lives, or could have impacted our lives if for example, abortion bans were in place, right? These individual stories can help to kind of highlight these personal stories to drive engagement and change opinions, right? We found this to be incredibly effective when it comes to abortion stories in particular. There's a number of organizations that have also found that to be true. And in many ways, I think this is also, especially when we talk about like digital organizing, in many ways, it's also really the root of the Me Too movement, right? Like people were sharing their deeply personal stories that helped move people and mobilize a movement. And so there's a lot of ways that we can take some of those tools and those strategies, whether it's online or in your personal life. Obviously, some stories require a lot of sensitivity and respect, so don't put it out there if you're not ready. But sharing personal stories can be really helpful.
I think it goes without saying, don't share misinformation. And if you do the truth sandwich. I think that was a great tool for those just joining. It's layering the truth on top of the information you're trying to correct and reiterating the truth. So the polling place, polls are open on XYZ date. Some may say that it's on this time, but actually they're fully open on this date. So truth sandwiches, I loved that.
Most of these go without saying also, although I'm seeing it a lot. And I think, don't attack people online. I think there's ways to, I'll just leave it at that. Don't attack people online. I think sometimes it's also just about what you have the energy for. I know I personally do not have a lot of energy to be going back and forth with people online, especially ones that can't be moved or mobilized. So I guess maybe thinking of it as like, again, the sort of respect piece, but also just like really just purely your own energy saving strategy.
Absolutely. And I think that from our perspective, from like monitoring the feminist account, we see concerted paid military style efforts to create misinformation or bully or troll online, depending on the certain topics we talk about. So I would say be very wary, because most probably, I would say like 8 out of 10 times it's not a real person. And honestly, it's just not worth your energy. That energy could be spent mobilizing for good, having good conversations with your family, or just some self-care. So yes, don't amplify Trump's misinformation. I think that's very important. I think it's one of those things that like all media is, or all press is good press. And by continuing to keep him in our algorithms, we're ultimately putting that information out there for someone to pick up and maybe read it wrong. Like recently, a friend of mine, she was making fun of something Trump had said during the debate stage, and she shared it on her stories and didn't put really a lot of context and just kind of shared it on the stories, the little like laughing face. I know her, and I know that she's trying to make fun of this person, but that doesn't mean that her entire community knows that. And so I think it actually could be more harmful, because then her community might be thinking that she's a Trump supporter. So yeah, just don't amplify Trump. He doesn't need any more of our energy.
Yeah, and I think to add to it too, it's sort of like focusing on how Trump's actions affect the country rather than kind of celebrating his missteps.
Yes. In here it says, don't get caught up in the details, focus on the larger mission. So I don't know how many of you have been out there canvassing, but recently I was canvassing for like to get abortion on the ballot in Arizona. And one of the things they taught us was, you might hear people that say like, what about term limits when it comes to abortion? Or what about exceptions, or all these different things? And yes, sure, but that's not really the point we're making. Right now, we're at an issue where the government is trying to control our bodies, and all those other decisions should be made between the doctor and the patient. And every story is unique. And I think that like if we focus on the larger mission, just like we want bodily autonomy, we want reproductive freedom, we deserve that healthcare, that's going to go a lot further than getting stuck in the details of like what it actually means and all of that. because ultimately that's not even really for us to decide. That's for the doctor and the patient to decide how that works. So the next page, we have some examples, which I don't really know if this tech is going to allow me to show it, but I'll try, so bear with me.
If not, we can always share some links, but really it's just kind of sharing some good examples. Obviously, we're a very large social media account, so we live in the social media space, and so see tons of content around sort of what's successful and also maybe not so successful. And so these were just kind of some examples of really honing in on sort of the do's and don'ts. We talked about spotlighting a few really great examples of some do's that we've shared across our platform.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that if the video works, trigger warning, it does have mentions of sexual violence. So trigger warning.
Bodies act as if it's all a hypothetical situation. So let's start sharing our real stories regarding reproductive care. I'll go first. After I was sexually assaulted, I was too scared to go to the police. I was too scared to go to my mom. I was too scared to go to my doctor. I thought that somebody would say that it was my fault or blame me. I felt so ashamed and disgusted with myself. But the person who assaulted me did not use protection, and I knew that there were a lot of risks associated with that, and I needed help. And I had a friend at the time who went to college 4 hours away from my parents' house, and their college campus had a Planned Parenthood on site. So I, told my mom I wanted to go party with my friend at a college for the weekend, and I went 4 hours just to go to that Planned Parenthood with her. I will never forget that experience. I will never forget those women at that Planned Parenthood and how they made me feel so safe and comfortable and taken care of, and they reassured me that it wasn't my fault. I genuinely do not know how I would have coped with that situation without that resource available to me, and my heart breaks for people in states who do not have organizations like Planned Parenthood available to them. So many people have stories similar to mine and completely unique from mine, all regarding reproductive care, that are all so necessary and so valid, and yet these things are constantly talked about as numbers and statistics, and I just think stories are a really powerful tool, and I would love to hear yours. So if you want to stitch this video and share your story, hopefully it can help some of us feel less alone and also prove a point about the importance of having access to reproductive care.
So I think that the important thing to note in that video is that it's a great example of sharing your story and how you can simply just by talking about a story and the care that maybe you got or didn't get. I think that we all have a story, and that is truly where your power lies. And so if you feel comfortable, tell it, because right now all hands are on deck, and we need to normalize some of these stories so that it gets really seen that it's important for the person that's experiencing it and their doctors or their community to make their own decisions. So I'm going to drop all these links actually so you guys can check them out in the chat.
That'd be great. My chat's not working, so, but I've been seeing all the lively comments and I love it.
And I think that concludes our section. So we're going to go into a Q&A right now, but thank you all so much. This is so great.
Thank you so much, Kai and Aisha. And I think we lost Kai. Oh, there you He's coming back. All right, I'm going to add Rinku back, and I'm also going to add Tamika. We just have a couple minutes, so I wanted to scan for the most salient questions. If you have a burning question that you really want to hear from one of our speakers the answer to, please go ahead and drop it in the chat. We love all the engagement, but it's also making it impossible for me to scroll all the way back up and find some of the questions that folks had posted earlier. If you don't have any questions at the moment, but you think of some later on, that's okay too. You can ask us questions follow us on our socials, Women's March, at Women's March, and at Feminist. And you can also wait or stay tuned for the email, the follow-up email that will be going out with these resources. It'll include the links to the recording, the links to the toolkits mentioned and shown, as well as the links to some of the positive media and the links to the slides that we shared. So really appreciate y'all for taking the time to join us today. And I'm going to kick it over to Tamika to go ahead and close us out.
Well, before we do that, I spotted a question in the chat for the feminist crew. Folks are asking if y'all are on Facebook. So I just want to make sure that y'all saw that question and y'all had an opportunity to respond.
Yes, we're Daily Feminism on Facebook.
Daily Feminism
and
on Facebook. You're asking.
And I saw some questions about our website. We do have a website. It's www.feminists.co. Feminist was taken.
And then the question, will this recording be available publicly? It will live on both our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. All right. Thank y'all so much. I am very grateful to all of our amazing speakers tonight. I hope that you all learned a lot. I hope that you feel more empowered. You feel more comfortable and confident in going out and speaking and talking about this election and getting your folks engaged and involved and activated over the next several months. And so we are, again, this is Women's March. You can follow us online, womensmarch.com. You can follow us on all the socials at Women's March. And I saw some questions about the march. And please look on our socials, look on our website, and you'll have more information there. There's a sign up if you want to pledge to host the march and you want to get access to all the toolkits for all of our sister march hosts. Please go to the website, go to the socials. You'll find all the information there. Questions about the date, all of those things will be answered. Please, again, follow us on all the things. Once more, I am Tamika. I am the Managing Director of Women's March. I want to give so much thanks to our Senior Director of Programs, Amanda Chavez Barnes, to our former board chair and just media messaging extraordinaire, Rinku Sen, and also the team from Feminist, Kai, and Aisha. Thank y'all so much. And thank all of you for joining. Please stay tuned. We will continue to have these conversations over the next several months and more opportunities for you all to engage, for you all to skill up, for you all to connect to each other. So once again, as we are fighting towards our feminist future, we will see y'all in the streets. Good night, y'all.